In a forgotten corner of Texas, where dust settles on broken dreams and silence covers up the worst kinds of secrets, a young woman named Clara lived a life most people only whispered about. Every day brought the same terror, the same bruises, the same desperate wish that tomorrow might be different. Her father's rage was as predictable as the sunrise, and the town's indifference was just as reliable. She had given up on rescue, on kindness, on the possibility that anyone would see her as more than damaged goods. Then one stormy night, a stranger rode into town. Ethan Cole was a man with money, land, and ghosts of his own. When he found Clara collapsed on a muddy road, bloodied and barely conscious, he made a choice that would change both their lives forever. But can two broken souls really heal each other? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The locket had been her mother's once, before the cancer took her. Clara remembered sitting on the porch steps at age 7, watching her mama's hands work the clasp open and closed like a heartbeat made of silver. Inside was a photograph so faded now that the faces were more memory than image. Her mother smiled in that picture, young and hopeful, wearing a white dress that Clara had never seen, except in that tiny frame. Her father stood beside her, straight-backed and almost handsome, before the drink had carved lines into his face and rage into his soul. That was 15 years ago. Clara was 24 now, though most folks in Redemption, Texas, still thought of her as a girl. Her father preferred it that way. Easier to control someone the town saw as a child, easier to explain away the bruises as discipline, the fear in her eyes as respect. The locket hung around her neck every day, hidden beneath her collar, a small weight against her heart that reminded her there had been gentleness once, somewhere in the history of her life. Redemption wasn't much to look at. Main Street ran straight through town like a spine, with the general store, the diner, the sheriff's office, and the First Baptist Church marking the only real landmarks worth mentioning. Everything else was houses scattered like afterthoughts, pickup trucks rusting in driveways, and the endless Texas sky pressing down on it all with a weight that made people keep their eyes on the ground. Population held steady at around 300 souls, though Clara sometimes wondered if that word applied to a place where people looked away so deliberately. She worked at Whitmore's general store 6 days a week, stocking shelves and running the register while Mrs. Whitmore minded the accounts. The old woman had kind eyes that saw too much and said too little. Sometimes Clara caught her staring at the bruises that makeup couldn't quite hide, at the way Clara flinched when the door opened too suddenly, at the careful way she moved through the world like someone expecting a blow. Mrs. Whitmore never asked questions. Nobody in Redemption asked questions. Sheriff Hayes came by the store every Tuesday for his coffee and cornbread. He was a large man going soft around the middle, with a badge that seemed more decorative than functional. He'd tip his hat to Clara, make small talk about the weather, and leave without ever acknowledging that he'd seen her father's truck parked outside the Rusty Nail Saloon at 10 in the morning, or that he'd driven past their house at night when the shouting carried through the windows. Law enforcement in Redemption meant keeping the peace between people who mattered. Clara had learned early that she didn't fall into that category. Sundays brought Reverend Thompson's sermons about forgiveness and honoring thy father. Clara sat in the back pew, her father conspicuously absent, sleeping off Saturday night's whiskey. The Reverend's voice would boom about family values and Christian duty, while his eyes skated past her like she was furniture. After service, church ladies would cluster near their cars, voices dropping to whispers when she walked by. She'd hear fragments, such a shame, and always was a difficult girl, and John Brennan tries his best, but after Martha died, as if her mother's death excused everything, as if grief gave a man license to destroy what remained. Her father, John Brennan, had been different once. Or so the town elders claimed, back when they still bothered to defend him. He'd worked construction before the accident that shattered his leg and his prospects in the same fall. Workers' compensation ran out. Yours got scarce. The bottle became his constant companion, and Clara became his outlet for every disappointment, every rage, every moment of self-loathing he couldn't face alone. The first time he hit her, she was 9 years old. She'd broken a plate, he'd broken her collarbone. By the time she was 12, she'd learned to read his moods like storm warnings, to disappear when the whiskey came out, to move through the house like a ghost. She'd tried running away twice. The first time, at 15, she made it as far as the county line before Sheriff Hayes picked her up and drove her home. Her father thanked him politely at the door. That night's beating taught her that escape attempts had consequence. The second time, at 18, she'd saved money for 3 months, hidden it in the toe of an old boot. The money disappeared. She never knew if he found it, or if someone at the store had seen her taking extra shifts and mentioned it. Either way, the message was clear. There was no leaving. There was no escape. There was only survival, one day bleeding into the next, until she couldn't remember what hope felt like. The house they lived in sat at the edge of town, a sagging 2-bedroom structure with peeling paint and a porch that tilted like a drunk. Inside, the air always smelled of stale beer and old rage. Clara kept her room sparse. A narrow bed, a dresser with a broken drawer, a lamp she'd salvaged from someone's trash pile. No pictures on the walls, no personal touches that could be used against her or destroyed in a fit of temper. She'd learned to live light, to own nothing that could be taken, to want nothing that could be denied. Her father occupied the living room most evenings, sprawled in his recliner with the television blaring and a case of beer within arm's reach. She'd learned his patterns like a prey animal learns the habits of predators. Monday through Thursday he drank steadily but remained mostly coherent. Fridays he got mean. Saturdays he got violent. Sundays She planned her life around this schedule, worked late on Saturdays when she could, locked her bedroom door every night, and kept a bag packed under her bed with clothes and toiletries, though she no longer believed she'd ever use it. The scars on her body told the story her voice could, a crooked finger that had healed wrong after he slammed it in a door, a scar above her left eyebrow from a thrown bottle, bruises in various stages of fading, always carefully hidden beneath long sleeves and high collars. The worst damage was invisible, the flinching at sudden movements, the inability to look people in the eye, the constant calculation of angles and exits in every room, the certainty deep in her bones that she deserved this somehow, that if she could just be better, quieter, smaller, it would stop. Miss Whitmore had been the closest thing to kindness in Clara's adult life. The old woman had hired her at 16, paying her in cash so her father couldn't steal it all, though he usually found it anyway. She'd slip Clara sandwiches when she worked through lunch, comment on how thin she was getting, offer advice that skirted around the real issue like water around a stone. "You're a smart girl, Clara. You could go to college, get out of this town." But they both knew college required transcripts, applications, money, and freedom. Clara had none of these things. There were moments, brief and sharp as lightning, when Clara imagined a different life. She'd see a family in the store, watch the father ruffle his daughter's hair with casual affection, and feel something crack inside her chest. She'd hear stories of women who'd left bad situations, started over somewhere new, and feel a hunger so intense it frightened her. But then she'd go home, and reality would reassert itself, with fists and fury, and those dreams would fold back into the dark place where she kept all the things too painful to examine. The town knew. That was the worst part. Redemption was too small for secrets, too interconnected for ignorance. They knew, and they did nothing. Some out of fear of John Brennan's temper, some out of the belief that a man's home was his castle and what happened there was his business. Some out of simple apathy, the worn-down exhaustion of people too tired to care about someone else's troubles when they had plenty of their own. Their silence was complicity, their indifference a weapon as brutal as her father's fists. Clara had stopped dreaming of rescue years ago. No white knight would ride into redemption. No sudden inheritance would appear. No miracle would lift her out of this life. She would endure until she couldn't anymore, and then one day her body would simply give out, and she'd be buried next to her mother in the cemetery behind the church, and people would shake their heads and say what a shame it all was before moving on with their lives. She was wrong about the rescue, not because it came in the form she'd imagined, but because it came in the form of choice, wrapped in circumstances she could never have predicted. The storm that rolled in that October evening was unusual for the season. The sky had been threatening all afternoon, clouds building like bruises across the horizon. Clara finished her shift at the store, counting out the register while Mrs. Whitmore watched the weather report with growing concern. The meteorologist was talking about severe thunderstorms, possible flash flooding, winds up to 60 miles per hour. Mrs. Whitmore offered to let Clara stay at her place for the night, a kindness wrapped in the pretense of needing help with inventory in the morning. Clara considered her father would be at the Rusty Nail by now, drinking away his disability check, working himself into the kind of mood that made Saturday nights dangerous. But refusing Mrs. Whitmore's offer meant explaining why she couldn't stay, meant admitting out loud what they both already knew, and admitting it meant doing something about it. And doing something about it meant everything would get worse before it got better, if it got better at all. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore, but I should get home. Dad will worry." The lie tasted bitter. Her father wouldn't notice if she disappeared for a week, as long as someone was there to absorb his rage when he needed a target. But these were the scripts they followed, the polite fictions that let everyone sleep at night. Mrs. Whitmore's face fell, but she didn't press. She never pressed. "You be careful out there, honey. Storm looks like it means business." She pressed a $20 bill into Clara's hand. "Take this. Just in case." Just in case of what? Neither of them said. The walk home took 15 minutes on a good day. Today, with the wind picking up and the first fat drops of rain starting to fall, it took longer. Clara pulled her thin jacket tighter, knowing it would be useless once the real rain started. The streets were empty, everyone sensible already inside, battening down for the storm. The sky had gone that peculiar green-gray color that meant serious weather, and the air crackled with electricity that made her teeth ache. She was 3 blocks from home when she heard the truck. Her father's pickup, unmistakable with its bad muffler and rattling bell. He pulled up beside her, window down, face already flushed with drink. "Get in." Not a request. Never a request. Clara climbed into the passenger seat, careful not to meet his eyes. The truck smelled of whiskey and cigarettes, and something sour she didn't want to identify. He drove too fast, taking corners hard enough to throw her against the door. He was muttering words, slurred, but the anger in them clear enough. Something about her mother. Something about money. Something about Clara being worthless, just like Martha had been, taking and giving nothing back. She'd heard it all before. The same accusations, the same bitterness, the same blame for every disappointment in his life. She made herself small in the seat, hands folded in her lap, breathing shallow. Sometimes if she was quiet enough, invisible enough, the storm would pass without landing on her. Not tonight. They pulled into the driveway and he killed the engine. The rain was coming down hard now, drumming on the truck's roof like fists. Lightning cracked across the sky, close enough that the thunder followed, almost immediately. He sat there gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. Clara waited. The air in the truck felt thick, dangerous. "You think you're better than me?" His voice was low, almost conversational. This was worse than yelling. "See you at that store, acting all sweet for that old lady. Like you're some kind of innocent. But I know what you are. I know what you're thinking." Clara said nothing. There was nothing to say. Anything would be wrong. "Look at me when I'm talking to you. Still quiet. Still deadly." She turned her head, made herself meet his bloodshot eyes, saw the calculation there. The decision being made. He was working himself up to it, building the justification. She was disrespectful. She was ungrateful. She needed to be taught a lesson. The same logic that had sustained years of violence, polished smooth with repetition. His hand shot out, grabbed her jaw, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You're nothing, you hear me? Nothing, just like your mother. She thought she could leave me too. Look where that got her." Her mother had died of cancer, not by choice, but Clara had learned not to correct his memories. He yanked her face closer. His breath reeked of bourbon, hot against her face. "You think someone's gonna come save you? You think anyone in this town gives a damn about you?" He shoved her back against the door, her head cracking against the window. Stars burst behind her eyes. "Get inside, and don't make me come looking for you." Clara stumbled out of the truck, rain immediately soaking through her clothes. She made it to the porch, fumbled with the door. Behind her, she heard him getting out, boots heavy on the gravel. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the keys. Lightning illuminated the yard in stark white flashes. She grabbed the keys, got the door open, slipped inside, but not fast enough. He caught her in the living room, spinning her around. The first blow caught her across the face, snapping her head to the side. She tasted blood. The second doubled her over, driving the air from her lungs. She tried to curl into herself, protect her head, but he was beyond reason now, beyond restraint. The storm outside matched the one inside, thunder and rage, indistinguishable. She lost time. Pain has a way of fracturing consciousness, turning seconds into eternities, and eternities into blank spaces where memory won't go. When she came back to herself, she was on the floor, her father standing over her, breathing hard. He looked surprised, as if he'd forgotten who she was, where he was. Then his expression hardened again. "Clean yourself up, you look disgusting." He stepped over her, heading for his bedroom. A moment later she heard his door slam. Clara lay there, taking inventory, ribs screaming, face swelling, something warm trickling from her hairline. The rain hammered against the windows, the whole house shaking with wind. She needed to move, needed to assess the damage, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Everything hurt in that deep, bone-level way that meant something was seriously wrong this time. She thought about her mother's locket, pressed against her bruised chest, wondered if her mother was watching from wherever the dead go, if she was proud that Clara had survived this long, or ashamed that she hadn't found a way out, wondered if there was a heaven, and if her mother was there waiting. The thought was almost comforting, but something in Clara, some stubborn spark she'd thought extinguished years ago, refused to let go. Not like this. Not tonight. Not for him. She dragged herself to her feet, using the couch for support. The room spun. She stumbled to the bathroom, caught sight of herself in the mirror, and almost didn't recognize the face staring back. Blood matted her hair on one side. Her left eye was already swelling shut. Split lip, bruises blooming across her jaw. She looked like someone who'd lost a fight. She looked like someone who'd been losing the same fight for years. She grabbed a towel, pressed it against the cut on her head. The bleeding was steady but not arterial. Probably needed stitches, definitely needed stitches. But going to the hospital meant questions, meant police reports, meant her father getting angrier. The calculation was automatic, the mental math of survival. Better to handle it herself, better to stay invisible. But the dizziness was getting worse, and when she tried to walk back to her room, her legs gave out. She caught herself on the doorframe, breathed through the nausea. Concussion, probably. She'd had them before. This one felt worse. From his bedroom she heard her father's snoring. He'd passed out, would sleep until morning, wouldn't remember or wouldn't care what he'd done. This was her chance. This might be her only chance. The thought crystallized with sudden, perfect clarity. She couldn't stay. Not tonight. Not ever again. If she stayed, he would kill her. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not next week. But eventually, The next beating would be the last one, and they'd bury her next to her mother, and everyone would say what a tragedy it was, and nothing would change. Clara grabbed her packed bag from under the bed, moved as quietly as her battered body would allow. She took the $20 from Mrs. Whitmore, added the few bills she had hidden in her dresser, $43 total. Not enough to get far, but enough to get away. She pulled on a rain jacket, wincing at the movement. The storm had reached its full fury by the time Clara slipped out the back door. Rain came down in sheets so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. The wind tore at her jacket, tried to push her back toward the house. She stumbled down the porch steps, into the yard, heading for the road without any real plan beyond away from him, away from this life, away from the inevitability of her own death at his hands. She walked along the shoulder of the road, no destination in mind. The next town was 12 miles east. She'd never make it in this weather, not in her condition, but she kept walking anyway. Each step was agony. Her ribs protested with every breath. The cut on her head had started bleeding again, rain washing the blood down her face in pink rivulets. The world tilted and swayed around her, reality becoming unstable at its edges. Headlights cut through the rain behind her. For a terrible moment, she thought it was her father's truck, that he'd woken up and come looking. She tried to move faster, but her body had nothing left to give. The vehicle slowed, pulling alongside her, not a truck, a newer model SUV, black and expensive looking. The passenger window rolled down. "Ma'am, are you all right?" A man's voice, deep and concerned. "Not from around here." The accent was different, softer somehow. Clara kept walking, didn't look over. Strangers were dangerous. Everyone was dangerous. The only safety was in staying invisible, staying away. "Ma'am, you're bleeding. Please, let me help you." The SUV kept pace with her stumbling steps. "At least let me get you out of this storm." She turned to tell him to leave her alone, and the movement made her dizzy. She saw his face through the rain-streaked window. Older than her, maybe late 30s, with dark hair and eyes that looked genuinely worried. He had a leather journal on the passenger seat, worn and well-used, the kind of detail her fragmenting mind latched onto. "I'm fine," she managed, but her voice came out weak, unconvincing. "You're not fine. You need medical attention." He pulled the SUV ahead of her, put it in park, got out, despite the downpour. He was tall, wearing a denim jacket that was immediately soaked through. He approached her carefully, hands visible, like someone trying not to spook a wounded animal. "My name is Ethan Cole. I'm not going to hurt you, but I think you're hurt pretty badly, and this storm isn't letting up. Please let me at least drive you to a hospital." Clara's legs chose that moment to give out completely. She felt herself falling, saw the muddy ground rushing up to meet her. Strong arms caught her before she hit, and then she was being lifted, carried. She tried to protest, but the words wouldn't form. The world was going grey at the edges, sound becoming distant and strange. Ethan Cole carried her to his SUV, settling her carefully in the passenger seat. He fastened the seatbelt around her, his movements efficient but gentle. "Stay with me now. What's your name?" "Clara." It came out as a whisper. "Clara. Okay. I'm going to get you help." He closed her door, ran around to the driver's side. The engine was still running, heat blasting from the vents. Clara realized she was shivering violently, her wet clothes plastered to her battered body. Ethan pulled back onto the road, driving carefully despite the urgency. He grabbed his phone, started to dial. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "No hospitals, no police." He glanced at her, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. He'd seen enough to know what this was. Who had done this? "Clara, you need a doctor. He'll find me. If you take me to Redemption County Hospital, he'll find me." She was crying now, though she hadn't meant to. "Please, just drop me at the bus station. I have money. I can get somewhere else. Ethan was quiet for a moment, jaw tight. His hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough that his knuckles went white. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. There's a clinic in Millbrook, next county over. Dr. Martinez runs it. He's discreet, and he's good. Will you let me take you there? Clara didn't have the strength to argue. She nodded, then immediately regretted the movement as pain lanced through her skull. Ethan reached behind her seat, pulled out a blanket, draped it over her shaking body. The kindness of the gesture made her throat tight. She couldn't remember the last time someone had shown her tenderness without expecting something in return. The drive to Millbrook took 40 minutes through the storm. Ethan drove with steady concentration, occasionally glancing over to make sure she was still conscious. Clara drifted in and out, catching fragments of the world outside. The rain finally starting to ease, dark countryside giving way to scattered lights. A small town that looked nothing like redemption, quiet and sleeping under the storm's tail end. The clinic was a modest building set back from the main road. Ethan pulled around to a side entrance, killed the engine. Wait here. I'll get Doc Martinez. He was gone before she could respond, jogging to the door, knocking with urgency. A light came on inside. A minute later, the door opened to reveal a compact man in his 60s, grey hair disheveled, wearing sweatpants and a medical university t-shirt. He listened to Ethan, looked toward the SUV, nodded once. Both men came back together. Doc Martinez opened Clara's door, crouched down to her level. His eyes were kind but clinical, already assessing. I'm Dr. Martinez. Ethan tells me you've been hurt. I'm going to help you, but I need to examine you first. Is that all right? Something about his calm, professional manner made Clara feel safer. She nodded. Between them, Ethan and the doctor got her inside and onto an examination table. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Doc Martinez pulled on gloves, began his assessment with practiced efficiency. He checked her pupils with a penlight, felt gently along her ribs, examined the cut on her head. His face remained neutral, but she saw his jaw tighten when he catalogued the bruises, the old scars alongside the new injuries. Concussion, definitely. 3 cracked ribs. This laceration needs stitches. Multiple contusions in various stages of healing. He met her eyes. How long has this been going on, Clara? A long time. Her voice was barely audible. Doc Martinez nodded, didn't push for details. I'm going to clean and stitch this cut. It's going to hurt. I can give you something for the pain. No. She needed to stay alert, needed to be able to run if necessary. I'm fine. The doctor exchanged a glance with Ethan, then began his work. Clara focused on breathing through the pain as he cleaned the wound, injected local anesthetic, began stitching. Ethan stood near the door, giving her space but not leaving. She noticed how his hands were clenched at his sides, how his jaw worked like he was grinding his teeth. He was angry, she realized, not at her, at what had been done to her. You need rest and monitoring for the concussion, Doc Martinez said, as he finished the stitches. At least 24 hours, and those ribs need time to heal. No strenuous activity for several weeks. He wrapped her torso in compression bandages with gentle, expert hands. I'm going to be straight with you, Clara. Whoever did this to you, if they get another chance, they might kill you. You understand that? Clara nodded. She'd understood that for a while now. Do you have somewhere safe to go? The question hung in the air. She had $43, no car, no friends outside redemption, and a father who would be looking for her by morning. No, Ethan spoke from his position by the door. She can stay with me. Both Clara and Doc Martinez turned to look at him. Ethan met their stares steadily. I've got a rental property just outside town while I close on some land. 3 bedrooms. She can have one. No strings, no expectations, just somewhere safe until she figures out what's next. Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence, or what little of it she'd managed to grab by running into that storm. But the practical part of her brain The part that had kept her alive this long knew she had no better options. She was hurt, exhausted, and hunted. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You don't know me." Ethan's expression softened slightly. "Because someone should. Because you're hurt and scared, and you need help. That's reason enough." Clara searched his face for deception, for the hidden agenda that always lurked behind kindness. But she saw only genuine concern, and something else, something that looked like old pain recognizing itself in another person. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Doc Martinez gave her painkillers, despite her protests, along with instructions for monitoring concussion symptoms. He wrote down his personal cell number. "You call me if anything changes. Dizziness gets worse, vision problems, vomiting, anything. And Clara, if you need help beyond medical, I know people. Social services, women's shelters, legal aid. You have options." She took the paper, folded it carefully. Options. The word felt foreign. Ethan's rental house was small, but clean. A ranch-style home with warm wood floors and furniture that looked comfortable rather than decorative. He led her to the spare bedroom, flipped on the light. The room was simple but welcoming. A queen bed with a thick quilt, a dresser, a window that looked out onto trees barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. Bathrooms across the hall. Kitchen's yours to use whenever. I'm usually up early, but don't feel like you need to be. He paused in the doorway. Lock clicks from the inside if that makes you feel safer. Clara's throat tightened. He understood. Somehow this stranger understood exactly what she needed to hear. Thank you. Get some rest. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow. He pulled the door closed behind him, leaving her alone. Clara stood in the center of the room, swaying slightly. Her reflection caught in the mirror above the dresser. Face swollen and stitched, eyes hollow, body bent with pain. She looked like a ghost. Felt like one too. She tested the door lock. It worked smoothly, solidly. Then she noticed the quilt on the bed. Really looked at it. Hand-stitched, made from what looked like hundreds of fabric squares, in blues and greens and soft yellows. The kind of thing someone's grandmother made with love and patience. The kind of thing Clara's mother might have made, if she'd lived long enough. She sank onto the bed, drew the quilt around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of lavender and safety. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara allowed herself to cry. Not the silent tears she'd learned to hide, but deep, wrenching sobs that tore through her damaged ribs and made everything hurt worse and somehow felt like the first real breath she'd taken in years. She cried for her mother, for the little girl she'd been before fear became her constant companion. For all the years lost to violence and silence, for the future she'd stopped believing in. She cried until exhaustion dragged her under, still wrapped in the quilt that smelled like someone else's memories of home. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The storm, Ethan, the clinic. She was safe. The thought felt surreal. Every part of her body screamed protest when she tried to sit up. The painkillers had worn off, leaving her to face the full extent of her injuries. She moved slowly, carefully, making her way to the bathroom. Someone, Ethan presumably, had left fresh towels on the counter along with a new toothbrush, still in its package, and travel-sized toiletries, more small kindnesses that felt monumental. She showered as best she could, avoiding the stitches, washing away the mud and blood and fear. The hot water stung her bruises, but felt like absolution. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel, she realized her bag, with her few clothes, was still in the bedroom. She dressed in the least damaged outfit she had, a pair of jeans and a long-sleeved shirt that covered most of the visible bruising. The kitchen was bright and open, windows overlooking a backyard filled with oak trees. Ethan stood at the stove, scrambling eggs. He looked different in daylight, still tall, still solid, but there was something gentle about him that didn't match his rough hands and weather-worn face. He glanced up when she entered, smiled cautiously. "Morning. How are you feeling?" He gestured to the coffee pot. "Help yourself. I wasn't sure how you take it, so there's cream and sugar on the counter." "Black is fine." Clara poured herself a cup, the warmth seeping into her hands. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to repay me." Ethan divided the eggs onto 2 plates, added toast. "Sit. You need to eat." They ate in careful silence. Clara found she was hungrier than she'd realized, the food settling warm and solid in her stomach. Ethan didn't push for conversation, seemed content to let her adjust at her own pace. She studied him when she thought he wasn't looking. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, but there was sadness around his eyes, old grief, carefully managed but never quite hidden. "Can I ask you something?" Clara set down her fork. "Of course. Why were you driving through Redemption last night?" "It's not exactly on the way to anywhere." Ethan took a sip of his coffee, considering. "I've been looking at property in the area. Ranch land. I used to own a place up in Montana, but I sold it a few years back after my wife died. Been drifting since then, I guess. Looking for somewhere that feels right to start over." "I'm sorry. About your wife." "Sarah." He said her name gently, like something precious. "Cancer took her 3 years ago. We had a good life together. 20 years of marriage, built our ranch from nothing, raised horses. She was my best friend." He paused, turning his coffee mug between his hands. "When she died, I couldn't stay there. Everything reminded me of her. So I sold it all and started driving. Been to 12 states in 3 years. Nothing felt right until I saw the land here." Clara heard the echo of her own loss in his words. Different circumstances, but the same hollow ache of loving someone who was gone. What made this place different? "Honestly, I don't know yet. But I drove past this property 3 days ago, 500 acres with a main house that needs work, good water, decent grazing land. Something about it just felt like possibility." He met her eyes. "Then the storm came, and I found you, and now I'm thinking maybe there was a reason I ended up here when I did." The weight of that hung between them. Clara wanted to believe in reasons, in purpose, in the idea that her suffering might lead somewhere meaningful, but years of disappointment had taught her to distrust hope. "How long are you staying in Millbrook?" "As long as it takes to close on the property. Few weeks, probably." "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. Longer if you want. I'll be moving to the ranch once the paperwork clears, but you could come with me if you don't have other plans." He said it matter-of-factly, as if offering someone he barely knew a place to live was the most natural thing in the world. Clara's chest felt tight. "I can't just live off your charity. I need to work to contribute something. The ranch is going to need a lot of work. I'll be hiring help. You could work there if you want, once you're healed up." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "But first things first. You need to recover. And we should probably figure out what to do about your father. Whether you want to press charges, get a restraining order." The mention of her father made Clara's stomach clench. "He'll be looking for me. Let him look. He doesn't know where you are. And if he does find you, he'll have to go through me first." There was steel in Ethan's voice, quiet but unmistakable. Clara wanted to warn him that her father was dangerous, that violence was his native language, that Ethan's kindness wouldn't protect him from John Brennan's rage. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with gratitude and fear, and something that might have been the first stirring of hope. They spent the rest of the morning in careful coexistence. Ethan gave Clara space, busying himself with phone calls about the property while she rested on the couch, drifting between sleep and wakefulness. The painkillers made everything fuzzy at the edges, softening the worst of the hurt. The quilt from the bedroom was draped over her, and she found herself running her fingers along the stitching, tracing patterns that someone's patient hands had created. In the afternoon, Doc Martinez stopped by to check on her. He examined her stitches, listened to her breathing, checked her pupils again. Healing well. You're young and strong despite everything. Keep taking the pain medication, keep the wound clean, and rest. No arguments about the rest part. After the doctor left, Clara found herself alone with questions she'd been avoiding. What came next? She couldn't go back to redemption, that much was certain. But what did forward look like? She had no education beyond high school, no skills except stocking shelves and surviving. The money Miss Whitmore had given her would last maybe a week if she was careful. She was 24 years old, with nothing to her name except a bag of clothes and a mother's locket. Ethan found her staring out the kitchen window, lost in thought. Penny for them? Clara turned, managed a weak smile. Just wondering what happens now. I've spent so long just trying to get through each day. I never thought past escape. Now that I'm out, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. You don't have to have it all figured out today, or this week, or even this month. Sometimes the best we can do is take things one step at a time. He paused. When Sarah got sick, everyone kept asking me about plans, treatment plans, care plans, end-of-life plans. I got so tired of planning for a future I didn't want to face. Finally, a hospice nurse told me something that stuck. She said the only plan that matters is the next right thing. Just figure out the next right thing, and then do that. What's the next right thing for me? Healing, that's it. Just focus on getting better. Everything else will still be there when you're ready to face it. The simple wisdom of it settled something in Clara's chest. Healing. She could do that. Or at least, she could try. Your wife was lucky to have you. I was the lucky one. Ethan's voice carried the weight of old love, carefully preserved. She taught me that strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about getting back up after you do. I think you already know that lesson pretty well. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Ethan spent his mornings on ranch business, meeting with contractors and realtors, planning the work that needed doing. Clara rested, read books from Ethan's small collection, and slowly began to believe she might actually be safe. He cooked meals they ate together, conversations gradually becoming easier as Clara's guard lowered, inch by careful inch. She learned he'd grown up in Wyoming, learned ranching from his father, who'd learned it from his father. He talked about horses with a passion that made his whole face light up, about the satisfaction of working land, about how being outside under a big sky made problems feel manageable. He asked about her in return, gentle questions that didn't push, and Clara found herself sharing pieces of her story. Not the worst parts, not yet, but fragments. Her mother's kindness, her love of reading, the dreams she'd had as a child before they'd been beaten out of her. One evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, Ethan mentioned he was driving out to see the property the next day. Would you want to come along? Only if you're feeling up to it. Fresh air might do you good. Clara hesitated. Leaving the house felt dangerous, exposed. But the walls were starting to close in, and some part of her yearned to see what had drawn Ethan to this place. Okay, yes, I'd like that. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, autumn asserting itself after the storm's violence. They drove out of Millbrook into increasingly rural countryside, fields giving way to rolling hills dotted with oak and mesquite. Ethan talked about his plans for the ranch, pointing out landmarks, his enthusiasm infectious. Clara watched the landscape roll past, felt something loosen in her chest. The property was beautiful in a wild, untamed way. A long drive led to a ranch house that had seen better days, but held good bones. Pastures stretched in all directions, fenced but overgrown. In the distance, a barn leaned slightly, but stood proud. Ethan parked near the house, killed the engine, and they sat looking at it all. What do you think? He asked. Clara stepped out of the SUV, turned slowly to take it all in. The silence was profound. broken only by birdsong and wind through grass. The sky stretched endless overhead, so blue it hurt to look at. Space, room to breathe, no neighbors close enough to hear shouting, no town watching and judging, just land and sky and possibility. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. They walked the property for an hour, Ethan pointing out where he planned to fix fencing, which pastures were best for grazing, where the water source ran. His vision for the place was clear and detailed, built on years of experience and a deep love for the work. Clara found herself caught up in it, imagining horses in those fields, the ranch house restored to life, a future that looked nothing like her past. Back in Redemption, John Brennan was tearing his house apart, looking for clues. Clara's room yielded nothing useful. Her bag was gone. The money he'd hidden in the kitchen was still there, so she hadn't robbed him. That meant she'd planned this, had been saving and waiting for her chance. The realization made his rage burn hotter. She'd played him. His own daughter had been plotting against him. He drove to Whitmore's general store, found it closed. Sunday, he'd lost track of days. He waited outside until Mrs. Whitmore arrived, Monday morning, followed her inside before she could lock the door behind her. "Where is she?" Mrs. Whitmore faced him with more courage than most people managed. "I don't know what you're talking about, John." "Clara, where'd she go? I haven't seen her since Friday evening. Is everything all right?" He could see the concern in her eyes, the judgment. Everyone in this town thought they were better than him. She ran off. "I'm trying to find her, bring her home safe. Maybe she doesn't want to be found." Mrs. Whitmore's voice was steady. "Maybe she's safer wherever she is." The implication hung between them. John felt his hands curl into fists. "You got no right to judge me. No right to interfere in family business." "I'm not interfering. I'm simply saying, if Clara left, maybe you should respect that choice." The old woman didn't back down, though he could see the fear in her eyes. Fear, but also resolve. John turned and left before he did something he'd regret, or something else the town could hold against him. He tried the sheriff's office next. Hayes listened to his story about Clara running away, took notes with infuriating slowness. "I'll keep an eye out, John, but she's an adult. If she left of her own accord, there's not much I can do. She's my daughter. She belongs at home." Hayes met his eyes with an expression John couldn't quite read. "I'll make some calls, see if anyone's seen her." But there was no urgency in his tone, no real concern, just the mechanical response of someone going through motions. Over the next week, John searched. He drove to the next 3 towns, showed Clara's picture at bus stations and diners. No one had seen her, or if they had, they weren't talking. He called in favors, had friends ask around. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air that stormy night. The not knowing ate at him, fed his rage and his shame, because under the anger was the creeping realization that she was really gone, that he'd pushed too far this time, and that everyone in Redemption knew it. Back at Ethan's rental, Clara was starting to believe in tomorrow. Her ribs were healing. The stitches came out after 10 days, leaving a scar she'd carry forever, a reminder, but also a marker. Before and after, she started helping around the house, cooking meals, doing laundry, small things, but they made her feel useful, less like a burden. Ethan protested at first, said she needed to rest, but eventually he understood. She needed to contribute, needed to prove to herself she had value beyond survival. The nightmares still came most nights. She'd wake gasping, convinced her father was breaking down the door. Ethan never commented on it, but she noticed he started leaving his bedroom door cracked, a light on in the hallway. Small kindnesses that said, "I hear you, you're not alone, you're safe here." They added up. These gestures, building something she was afraid to name. Trust, maybe, or the foundations of it. 2 weeks after the storm, Ethan's property closed. He came home with papers and a grin. "It's official," Coal Ranch is mine. He paused. Ours if you want it to be. Clara looked at him, this man who'd found her in the mud and given her a future she hadn't dared imagine. I want it to be. Moving to the ranch felt like stepping into a different life. The house needed work, walls that needed painting, floors that creaked in places, a kitchen from 3 decades past. But it was solid and spacious, with windows that let in floods of morning light. Clara took the bedroom at the back of the house, the one that looked out over the pastures. She hung her mother's locket on the bedpost where she could see it first thing each morning. Ethan hired a small crew to help with the immediate repairs. Miguel Santos arrived first, a man in his late 50s with weathered hands and eyes that had seen hard living. He'd worked ranches all his life, knew cattle and horses and land with the kind of wisdom that only comes from decades of attention. He took one look at Clara, nodded politely and went about his business without questions or judgment. Tommy Reeves came next, barely 22, all enthusiasm and energy. He'd grown up on a ranch 2 counties over, dreamed of having his own place someday. He talked constantly, asked a million questions, and worked with the kind of determination that made up for his lack of experience. He treated Clara with easy friendliness, like her presence was the most natural thing in the world. Rachel Kim was last, and Clara liked her immediately. She was in her 30s, compact and muscular, with short, dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She'd been working ranches since she was 16, could outwork most men twice her size, and didn't suffer fools. She shook Clara's hand with a grip like iron, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Good to have another woman around. These boys need civilizing." The first week was chaos. Contractors coming and going, decisions about fence lines and barn repairs, ordering supplies, establishing routines. Clara tried to help where she could, but her ribs still protested, heavy lifting, and her energy flagged quickly. Ethan was patient, kept reminding her to rest, but she hated feeling useless while everyone else worked. It was Rachel who solved it. She found Clara in the kitchen, frustrated and restless. "You any good with numbers?" "I guess. I used to manage inventory at the store back home." "Perfect. We need someone to handle supply orders, keep track of expenses, coordinate deliveries. Ethan's good at ranching but terrible at paperwork. You'd be doing us all a favor." Rachel pulled out a battered ledger and a pile of receipts. "Think you can make sense of this mess?" Clara looked at the chaos of papers and felt something click into place. This she could do. This was useful. Yes, absolutely. She set up a workspace at the kitchen table, organized the receipts by category, started building a system. The work was satisfying in a way she hadn't expected, bringing order to chaos, seeing patterns emerge from scattered data. Ethan walked in that evening to find her surrounded by papers, calculator in hand, completely absorbed. "You didn't have to do all this today," he said, but she could hear the relief in his voice. "I wanted to. Besides, your filing system was a disaster. How were you keeping track of anything?" She held up a receipt from 3 months ago. "You're still paying for a storage unit in Montana." Ethan winced. "I forgot about that. I'll call them tomorrow, get it sorted." Clara organized the papers into neat stacks, and we need a better system for tracking ranch expenses versus personal expenses. Right now, it's all mixed together. He sat down across from her, a smile playing at his lips. "What would I do without you?" The question hung in the air, not quite rhetorical. Clara felt her face warm. "You'd probably keep paying for storage units you don't need." That first week turned into the first month. Fall settled over the ranch with crisp mornings and golden afternoons. The work continued, fences repaired, barns stabilized, pastures cleared. Ethan brought in the first horses, 4 rescued Mustangs he planned to gentle and train. Clara watched him work with them, patient and calm, never forcing, always waiting for them to choose trust. It reminded her of how he'd been with her. The work gloves appeared on her 3rd week at the ranch. Ethan left them on the kitchen table with a note. "For when you're ready, no pressure. They were good quality leather, broken in but well maintained, sized for smaller hands. Clara put them on, flexed her fingers. They fit perfectly. She started small, feeding the horses in the morning, mucking stalls when her ribs allowed it. Ethan taught her to mend fences, showing her how to stretch wire properly, how to secure posts. Miguel taught her about horses, how to read their moods, how to approach them without fear. Tommy showed her every shortcut he knew, most of which didn't actually save time, but made her laugh. Rachel taught her self-defense. That happened on a Saturday afternoon. Clara was in the barn when Rachel appeared with a determined expression. "Come on, we're going to the equipment shed." The shed was empty, spacious. Rachel moved some tools aside, creating an open area. "I'm going to teach you how to protect yourself. Not because I think you'll need it here, but because every woman should know how." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't know if I can." "You can, and you will." Rachel's voice was firm but not unkind. "I grew up with a father who thought his fists solved problems. Took me years to learn I was stronger than I believed. I'm not going to let another woman go through life feeling powerless." They started with basic stances, how to stand solid, how to make yourself harder to knock down. Rachel was patient, correcting Clara's posture, showing her again and again until muscle memory started to form. Then simple strikes, how to throw a punch without breaking your thumb, where to aim for maximum effect, how to use an attacker's momentum against them. "The goal isn't to win a fight," Rachel explained. "It's to create an opening to run. You hit hard, you hit fast, you get away. Pride doesn't matter, survival does." Clara practiced until sweat soaked through her shirt, and her muscles trembled, but with each successful strike, each movement that felt solid and sure, something shifted inside her. Power. Not over anyone else, but over herself. The ability to defend her own body, her own space. It was transformative in a way she hadn't expected. Evening meals became the ritual that bound them all together. Miguel would often stay, and Tommy always found an excuse to be around when food was mentioned. Rachel joined more nights than not. They'd gather around the big kitchen table, passing dishes and swapping stories. Miguel told tales of ranches he'd worked, horses he'd known, the wisdom accumulated over a lifetime of hard work. Tommy talked about his dreams for the future. Rachel shared carefully edited versions of her past, enough to let Clara know she wasn't alone in her history. Ethan presided over it all with quiet contentment. This found family he was building. Clara would watch him laugh at Tommy's jokes, listen seriously to Miguel's advice, trade good-natured insults with Rachel, and feel something warm expanding in her chest. Belonging. She belonged here. One evening, after the others had gone home, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch watching the sun set over the pastures. The horses grazed peacefully, dark shapes against the golden light. The air smelled of grass and autumn, and the particular peace that comes with the end of a day well spent. "Can I ask you something?" Clara's voice was soft. "Always. Do you ever regret it, finding me that night, taking on all this complication?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were measured, careful. "I regret that you went through what you did. I regret that I couldn't find you sooner, couldn't protect you from all those years of pain, but regret bringing you here. Never. Not for a single second." "Why?" Clara turned to look at him. "I'm nobody. Just some girl who needed rescuing." "You're wrong about that. On multiple counts." Ethan met her eyes steadily. "First, you didn't need rescuing. You'd already saved yourself. You were the one who walked out that door, who survived that storm, who chose to keep living. I just offered a safe place to land. And second, you're not nobody. You're kind and strong and capable. You took a ranch in chaos and gave it order. You work harder than anyone I know, even when you're still healing. You make everyone around you better. That's not nobody, Clara. That's someone extraordinary." Clara felt tears threatening, fought them back. She wasn't used to being seen this way, being valued for anything beyond her ability to endure punishment. You make it sound like I'm special. You are special. I just wish you could see yourself the way I see you. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Clara broke it first, looking away, afraid of the intensity in his eyes and what she might reveal in her own. I should check on the horses one more time before bed, she said, standing quickly. Clara, his voice stopped her. You don't have to run from this. From me. Whatever this is between us, we can take it as slow as you need, or not at all, if that's what you want. Your comfort, your healing, that comes first. All. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and escaped into the soft darkness of the barn, her heart hammered against her ribs. She did feel something for Ethan, had been feeling it grow for weeks now, but it was tangled up with gratitude and fear and the learned belief that love came with conditions, with pain, with the loss of self. How could she trust these feelings when she didn't trust her own judgment? When the only example of love she'd had ended in a hospital bed and a grave. The horses nickered softly as she moved through the barn, checking water buckets she knew were already full. The big Mustang, the one Ethan called Ghost, came to the stall door and bumped her shoulder gently. She stroked his neck, finding comfort in his solid warmth. Animals were easier than people. They didn't expect things you couldn't give. They didn't leave or turn cruel when you failed to meet invisible standards. Back in Redemption, the gossip mill churned. Someone had seen Clara with a man in Millbrook. Someone else heard she was living on a ranch. The stories grew in the telling, each version more scandalous than the last. Clara had run off with a rich stranger. Clara was working as a ranch hand, probably doing more than working if you knew what I mean. Clara had always been trouble, just like her mother. Miss Whitmore heard it all at the store and said nothing, but she prayed every night that Clara was safe, that she'd found something better than what Redemption had offered. Sheriff Hayes heard the stories too, and filed them away with a growing sense of guilt he wasn't quite ready to face. Reverend Thompson preached a sermon about the prodigal son, about welcoming back those who strayed, completely missing that Clara hadn't strayed. She'd escaped. John Brennan heard the stories and felt his rage crystallize into something colder, more dangerous. His daughter was living with some man, making him look like a fool in front of the whole town. Every whisper, every pitying look he received in the rusty nail fed the fury. She'd made her choice. When he found her, and he would find her, she'd learn what happened to people who disrespected family. He started making calls, asking questions. Millbrook wasn't far. Someone there would know something. He had time and motivation, and that was more than enough. At the ranch, November arrived with cooler temperatures and shorter days. The crew worked on winterizing the property, preparing for the cold months ahead. Clara had grown stronger, her body healing properly for the first time in her adult life. Good food, honest work, and safety had transformed her. She moved with more confidence now, met people's eyes when she spoke, laughed without flinching at sudden sounds. Miguel noticed it during a lunch break. They were sitting on hay bales near the barn, eating sandwiches. Clara had made that morning. "You've changed," he said simply. "When you first came here, you moved like a ghost. Now you move like you own the ground under your feet." Clara considered his words. "I feel different, stronger, maybe, like I'm becoming someone I didn't know I could be. That's because you're safe here. Safety changes everything." Miguel's eyes were kind, knowing, "I grew up with violence too. My father, then my first wife. Took me 40 years to learn that love doesn't hurt, that home should be the safest place, not the most dangerous. This ranch, Ethan, all of us, we want you to know that safety, to feel it in your bones." "Thank you," Clara's voice caught, "for seeing me, for not judging. Nothing to judge. You survived. That takes more strength than most people will ever need. Miguel finished his sandwich, stood. Now come on. Those fence posts won't set themselves. They worked together through the afternoon, Miguel teaching and Clara learning. The physical labor was meditative, repetitive motions that let her mind wander. She thought about Ethan, about the feelings she was trying so hard to control, about the life she was building here, brick by brick, choice by choice, about the woman she might become if she could let herself believe in futures, instead of just surviving presents. That evening, a truck she didn't recognize pulled up the drive. Clara's heart seized. She was in the yard with Rachel, practicing the self-defense moves that were becoming second nature. Both women tensed as the truck door opened, but it was Sheriff Hayes who stepped out, looking uncomfortable and apologetic. "Miss Brennan, Mr. Cole," he nodded to Ethan, who'd come out of the barn at the sound of the vehicle. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. What can we do for you, Sheriff?" Ethan's voice was carefully neutral, but Clara saw how he'd positioned himself slightly in front of her, protective without being obvious about it. "Just need to ask Miss Brennan a few questions, if that's all right. Her father filed a missing persons report. I need to verify she's here of her own free will." Hayes looked genuinely regretful. "It's just procedure." Clara found her voice, surprised at how steady it sounded. "I'm here by choice, Sheriff. My father doesn't get to decide where I live anymore. I'm 24 years old." Hayes blinked. 24? Your father said you were 19. My father says a lot of things that aren't true. Clara lifted her chin. "Check my birth certificate if you don't believe me. Clara Marie Brennan, born March 15th, 2001. That makes me an adult who doesn't need her father's permission to leave an abusive situation." The word hung in the air. Abusive. Clara had never said it out loud before, had never named what her father did with such clarity. But she saw the sheriff's face change, saw recognition and shame war for dominance. "I see." Hayes cleared his throat. "And you're being treated well here. You're safe, safer than I've ever been in my life." Clara gestured around the ranch. "I work here. I have a room, a salary, and people who respect me. I'm not a prisoner. I'm not being coerced. I left redemption because staying would have killed me, and I think you know that." Hayes had the grace to look ashamed. "Miss Brennan, I want you to know, if I'd understood the full situation, if I'd known how bad it was, I would have intervened. Would you?" Clara's voice was hard now, all the fear transmuting into anger. "You saw the bruises, Sheriff. Everyone saw them. Whitmore saw them. Reverend Thompson saw them. You all saw, and you all chose to look away because it was easier than doing something. So forgive me if I don't quite believe you would have helped." The truth of it settled over them all. Hayes looked at his boots, unable to meet her eyes. "You're right. Failed you. The whole town failed you. I'm sorry doesn't cover it, but I am. Truly." Ethan spoke up, his voice level but with an edge of steel. "What happens now? Is John Brennan going to be a problem?" "I'll tell him I found you, that you're safe and here voluntarily. That should satisfy the report." Hayes paused. "But between you and me, John's been asking around. He's angry. I can't stop him from coming out here, but I can make sure he knows there are eyes on the situation now. That if anything happens, I'll be paying attention this time." It was something, Clara supposed. Not justice, not protection, but acknowledgement at least. "Thank you, Sheriff." After Hayes left, Clara found herself shaking. The confrontation had cost more than she'd realized. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, a careful, comforting weight. "You did good. You stood up for yourself." "He's going to come here," Clara said. "My father. He won't let this go. Let him come." Rachel's voice was fierce. "He'll have to go through all of us. And I promise you, Clara, we won't look away." Miguel and Tommy had emerged from the barn during the conversation. They stood together now, a united front. "She's right," Miguel said. "You're one of us now. That means something." Clara looked at them. This collection of people who'd become family in the space of a few months, who saw her as worth defending, worth protecting, worth standing beside. Her throat felt tight with emotion. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Too late," Tommy grinned. "We're trouble magnets anyway. Might as well be trouble together." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed watching moonlight paint patterns on the ceiling, replaying the day's events. Her father knew where she was. It was only a matter of time before he showed up. And then what? Would all her growth, all her healing, crumble in the face of his rage, or had she changed enough to stand firm? She got up, padded quietly to the kitchen for water, found Ethan already there, staring out the window into darkness. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. He turned, gave her a tired smile, thinking about tomorrow, about what comes next. "I don't like the idea of your father showing up here, causing trouble. Maybe he won't. Maybe the sheriff's visit will be enough to keep him away." "Maybe," but Ethan didn't sound convinced. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you weeks ago." Her stomach clenched. Here it was, the catch, the condition she'd been waiting for. "Okay, when Sarah died, she left me a letter, told me not to open it until I was ready to live again, until I'd found my way through the grief. I opened it 2 weeks ago." He pulled a folded envelope from his pocket, worn from handling. "She knew me better than I knew myself, knew I'd run from the pain, try to outrun the memories. She wrote about how love doesn't end when someone dies, it transforms. How closing yourself off to protect against hurt means closing yourself off to joy too." Clara waited, not sure where this was going. "She told me that when I was ready, when I found someone who made me want to build again instead of just survive, I should take that chance, not feel guilty for it, not think I was betraying her memory." Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. "I think she'd have liked you. Sarah always saw the strength in people others overlooked. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to understand something. What I feel for you, it's not about replacing Sarah or trying to recreate what we had. You're not a substitute for what I lost. You're something entirely new, entirely yourself, and I'm falling for you, Clara. Have been for a while now, but I need you to know there's no pressure, no expectation. You don't owe me anything, not gratitude, not affection, nothing. If all you ever want from me is friendship and a safe place to live, that's enough." Clara's heart was hammering so hard, she was sure he could hear it. "What if I want more than that?" Hope flared in his eyes. "Do you? I don't know how to do this, how to trust this. Every example of love I've had ended in pain. My mother died. My father turned into a monster. How do I know this won't end the same way?" "You don't." Ethan's honesty was stark. "I can't promise I'll never hurt you or that I'll never die. Life doesn't come with those guarantees. But I can promise I'll never raise a hand to you. I'll never use your fear against you. I'll never make you smaller to make myself feel bigger. Love shouldn't diminish you, Clara. It should make you more yourself, not less." She wanted to believe him, wanted to take this leap and trust that the landing would be soft. But fear was a powerful thing, lodged deep in her bones from years of conditioning. "Can we take it slow? Figure this out one step at a time. As slow as you need. We've got time." He reached out, gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, achingly so. Clara leaned into it despite her fear. They stood there in the moonlit kitchen, the space between them charged with possibility. Clara thought about Sarah's letter, about a woman who loved her husband enough to want him to be happy, even after she was gone. About the kind of love that wasn't possessive or controlling, but generous and freeing. She'd never imagined love could look like that. "Your wife sounds like she was remarkable." She was, but so are you, in completely different ways. You survived things she never had to face. Built yourself back up from nothing but determination and will. That's its own kind of remarkable. Ethan stepped back, giving her space. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do about your father. But tomorrow came with surprises, neither of them expected. Ethan's lawyer called first thing in the morning, asking Clara to come to his office in town. There were documents that needed her signature. His important documents regarding her legal status. The drive to Millbrook was tense. Clara sat in the passenger seat of Ethan's truck, hands twisted together in her lap. "What do you think this is about?" "I'm not sure, but Marcus wouldn't have called unless it was important." Ethan reached over, squeezed her hand briefly, before returning his to the wheel. The gesture was comforting. Marcus Webb's office was in a converted Victorian house on Main Street, all dark wood and leather chairs. The lawyer himself was in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. He shook their hands, gestured to chairs across from his desk. "Thank you for coming on short notice. Clara, I've been doing some research into your background, and I've discovered some things you need to know about." Clara's stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" Marcus pulled out a thick folder. "When Sheriff Hayes mentioned your actual age versus what your father had been claiming, I got curious, started pulling records, birth certificate, school records, your mother's death certificate, and that led me to your mother's will and estate documents. My mother didn't have an estate. We were poor. That's what your father wanted everyone to believe." Marcus opened the folder, pulled out documents. Martha Brennan inherited a substantial sum from her parents when they died. She was an only child. The amount, adjusted for investment growth over the years, currently sits at approximately $430,000. The number didn't make sense. Clara stared at the lawyer, unable to process what he was saying. "That's not possible. We lived in a falling-down house. We had nothing. You had nothing because your father controlled everything. When your mother died, she left her entire estate to you in a trust. It was supposed to be released to you when you turned 21. Your father was named as trustee until then, which gave him access to manage the funds." Marcus's expression was grim. "He's been systematically draining that trust for years, claiming expenses for your care, your education, your upkeep. All lies. The trust should have transferred to your control 3 years ago, but he continued to file paperwork, claiming you were a minor dependent." Clara felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. All those years of poverty, of going without, of believing they had nothing. All those times her father had raged about money, about what things cost, about how she was a burden. It had all been lies. He'd been stealing from her while making her feel guilty for existing. "How much is left?" Ethan asked quietly. "After his mismanagement and theft, approximately $270,000, still a substantial sum." Marcus looked at Clara with sympathy. "There's more. When I started digging, I found hospital records, police reports that were filed but never followed up on, teacher notes from your school years documenting suspected abuse. There's a paper trail a mile long that proves what was happening to you. With this evidence, we can build a case for financial exploitation, fraud, and assault. We can make sure he never has access to you or your money again." Clara couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, the air too thick. Nearly $300,000. Her farce had always been hers. While she'd been counting pennies and accepting Mrs. Whitmore's charity and believing she was worthless, there had been money, her mother's money, her mother's love, transformed into a future her father had stolen piece by piece. "I'm going to be sick." She stood abruptly, looking for a bathroom. Marcus pointed down the hall. Clara made it just in time, her stomach rebelling against the weight of these revelations. When she emerged, pale and shaking, Ethan was waiting in the hallway. "I've got you." He steadied her with gentle hands. "I know this is overwhelming. He stole from me. All those years, he was stealing from me while telling me I was the burden, the cost, the problem." Her voice broke. "My mother tried to take care of me even after she was gone, and he took that too. We're going to make this right." Ethan's voice was hard with anger, but his touch remained gentle. "We're going to make him pay for everything he did." They went back to Marcus's office. The lawyer had more documents ready. "Clara, I need to know what you wanted. We can pursue criminal charges for the financial fraud and the assault. We can file for a restraining order. We can freeze what's left of the trust so he can't access another penny. But the decision is yours." Clara thought about her mother, who'd tried to give her security and hope, about all the years stolen, all the pain inflicted, all the lies told, about the woman she might have been if she'd known the truth, about the fact that her father had kept her trapped, not just through violence, but through manufactured poverty, through making her believe she had no options, no resources, no value beyond what she could endure. I want to press charges. Her voice was steady now, clear and certain. I want him to answer for everything he did. I want the world to know what he is, and I want my mother's money back, so I can use it the way she intended, to build a life, to have a future. She looked at Marcus. How do we do this? Marcus smiled, the expression wolfish. We start with documentation, medical records, financial records, testimony. Then we file charges and let the prosecutor's office build their case. It won't be quick, and it won't be easy. You'll have to testify, face him in court, but with the evidence we have, I'm confident we can win. The next weeks were a blur of meetings and paperwork. Clara gave her statement to the district attorney, a woman named Patricia Reeves, who specialized in domestic violence cases. Patricia was thorough and compassionate, walking Clara through every detail without judgment. They compiled medical records from Doc Martinez, obtained copies of the hospital visits Clara had made over the years. Each document was a piece of evidence, a fragment of truth that couldn't be denied. Ethan was with her through all of it, a steady presence that asked nothing, but gave everything. He sat in waiting rooms, held her hand when the memories got too heavy, reminded her to eat and sleep, and breathe when the process threatened to overwhelm her. The ranch crew circled the wagons, taking on extra work so Clara could focus on the legal battle ahead. Rachel intensified Clara's self-defense training. You're going to face him in court, she said during one session. You need to know physically and mentally that you can stand your ground, that he can't hurt you anymore. They practiced until Clara's muscles burned and her mind grew quiet with focus. The physical work helped, gave her somewhere to channel the rage and fear and grief. She was getting stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. Each day she felt a little more solid, a little more certain of her right to exist, without apology. Miguel noticed the change during an afternoon spent repairing the barn roof. They worked side by side, the rhythm of hammers and conversation comfortable. You carry yourself different now, he observed, like you've decided something important. I have. Clara set down her hammer, looked out over the ranch. I've decided I'm worth fighting for, that my life matters, that what he did was wrong, and I don't have to carry shame for his actions anymore. That's good wisdom. Took me 20 years to learn the same thing. Miguel's weathered face was gentle. Your mama would be proud of you. The thought made Clara's throat tight. Her mother had tried to protect her, had set aside money and made plans for Clara's future. She'd done what she could within the limits of her own mortality. Now it was Clara's job to honor that gift, to become the woman her mother had hoped she'd be. Ethan kept a pocket watch on his desk, a family heirloom passed down from his father. It was inscribed with simple words, "Stand for what's right." Clara had seen him check it often during this time, as if drawing strength from that directive. One evening, he showed it to her, let her hold the weight of it in her palm. My father gave me this when I left home at 18. Told me that life would present choices between what's easy and what's right, and that I should always choose right, even when it cost me. Ethan's voice was reflective. Standing with you, supporting you through this, it's the easiest right choice I've ever made. Clara handed back the watch carefully. What if I lose? What if he finds some way to make this all go away? Then we'll deal with that. But Clara, you're not going to lose. The evidence is overwhelming. The law is on your side this time. He paused. And even if the worst happened and the legal system failed you, you've already won the important battle. You got out. You survived. You're building a life he can't touch. That's victory, regardless of what any court says. She wanted to believe him. Some days she did. Other days, the fear crept back in, whispering that she was being foolish, that her father would find a way to win, that men like him always did. Those were the days Ethan would find her staring into space, lost in dark thoughts, and he'd gently pull her back to the present. One step at a time. That's all we have to do. The court date was set for early December. Clara spent the weeks leading up to it preparing her testimony. Patricia coached her on how to answer questions, how to stay focused under cross-examination, how to keep her composure when her father's lawyer tried to rattle her. They practiced until Clara could recite the facts of her abuse without breaking down, could describe the financial theft without losing her thread. The goal is to be credible and clear, Patricia explained. The jury needs to see you as a survivor, not a victim. Someone who's telling the truth about difficult things, not someone looking for attention or revenge. Clara understood the distinction. She wasn't doing this for revenge, though she wouldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing her father face consequence. She was doing it for closure, for justice, for the chance to close this chapter of her life completely. As the court date approached, tension settled over the ranch. Everyone felt it, the weight of what was coming. Tommy tried to lighten the mood with jokes that fell flat. Rachel became more protective, always watching the driveway as if expecting trouble. Miguel prayed quietly but fervently, in Spanish words that sounded like benediction even when Clara couldn't understand them. Ethan grew quieter, more watchful. Clara would catch him staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Worry, certainly, but also something deeper. Admiration, maybe, or love. The thought made her chest ache with equal parts hope and fear. 1 week before the trial, they were working in the barn when Ethan finally spoke what had been on his mind. I want you to know something. What had been on his mind. I want you to know something. Whatever happens in that courtroom, it doesn't change anything between us. You're not defined by what he did or by what the court decides. You're defined by who you choose to be, and the woman you're choosing to be is someone I'm honored to know. Clara set down the feed bucket she'd been carrying. I'm scared, not just of facing him, but of what comes after. What if I fall apart on the stand? What if I'm not strong enough? You're the strongest person I know. Ethan closed the distance between them, cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. You walked through fire and came out breathing. You rebuilt yourself from ashes. That's not weakness, Clara. That's the kind of strength most people never have to find. She leaned into his touch, let herself draw comfort from his certainty. What did I do to deserve you? You existed, that's all. You existed, and you kept existing even when everything in your life told you not to. That's enough. He pressed his forehead to hers, the gesture achingly tender. I love you. I need you to know that going into this, I love you. Not because you're broken or because I saved you, but because you're brave and kind and real, because you make me want to be better, because when I think about the future, I see you in it. The words settled over her like a blessing. Clara had spent so long believing she was unlovable, that love meant pain and control and loss. But this felt different. This felt like being seen and chosen and valued for exactly who she was. I love you too. I think I have for a while, but I was too afraid to say it. You don't have to be afraid. Not here. Not with me. Ethan kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. The kiss was gentle and sure, a promise wrapped in tenderness. When they pulled apart, Clara felt something shift inside her, a settling, a rightness, like a bone finally set after being broken too long. They spent that evening on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the December cold, watching stars emerge in the enormous Texas sky. Clara tried to memorize this feeling, this moment of peace before the storm. Whatever happened in court, she had this place, these people, this love. Her father couldn't take it away. The law couldn't diminish it. It was hers, built with her own hands and choices. Tell me about after, she said quietly. After the trial, what does that look like? Ethan considered. his arm warm around her shoulders. "I'd like to expand the ranch, bring in more horses, maybe start a program for rescued animals, build this place into something that matters, something that helps." He paused. "And I'd like you to be part of that, not as someone who works for me, but as a partner. In the ranch and in life, if you'll have me." "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Not yet, not until after the trial. You need to go into that courtroom knowing you're whole on your own, not dependent on me or anyone else." Ethan smiled. "But afterwards, when this is done and you've proven to yourself that you can face the worst and survive it, then I'm going to ask you properly, and I hope you'll say yes." The morning of the trial arrived cold and clear. Clara dressed carefully in clothes Rachel had helped her choose, simple and professional, nothing that could be used to judge her character. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone she barely recognized, confident, determined, ready. The scared girl who'd fled into a storm was still there, would always be part of her story, but she wasn't all of who Clara had become. The courthouse in the county seat was an imposing brick building, steps leading up to heavy doors that seemed designed to intimidate. Clara's support system surrounded her. Ethan on one side, Patricia on the other. Behind them, Miguel, Rachel and Tommy dressed in their Sunday best. Mrs. Whitmore had driven over from Redemption, her presence a quiet statement of support. Even Doc Martinez had come, prepared to testify about Clara's injuries. Inside, the hallways echoed with footsteps and muted conversations. Other cases were being heard, other lives decided by the machinery of just Clara. Felt small and exposed, but then Ethan squeezed her hand, and she remembered. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. They passed through security, found the courtroom, took their seats. The room was exactly like she'd imagined from television. All dark wood and formal arrangement. The jury box sat empty, waiting to be filled with 12 strangers who would decide her father's fate. The judge's bench loomed high, a position of authority that Clara hoped would finally be used in her favor. Then her father arrived, flanked by his court-appointed attorney. John Brennan looked smaller than Clara remembered, diminished somehow. Prison orange didn't suit him. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt and unshaven, but his eyes when they found her were the same. Full of rage and possession, the look that said she was his property, his to punish, his to control. Clara met his gaze and didn't look away. She was done, flinching, done making herself small to accommodate his anger. She held his stare until he was the one who looked away first, and the tiny Kitty felt enormous. Jury selection took most of the morning. Patricia was meticulous, asking questions designed to weed out anyone who believed a father had absolute authority over his children, anyone who dismissed domestic violence as a private family matter. By lunch, they had 12 jurors, 7 women and 5 men, a mix of ages and backgrounds. Clara studied their faces, trying to read sympathy or skepticism, but found mostly careful neutrality. The trial began in earnest after lunch. The prosecutor laid out the case in her opening statement, detailing years of abuse, the financial fraud, the systematic control John Brennan had exerted over his daughter. She spoke clearly and factually, painting a picture of cruelty that made the jury shift uncomfortably in their seats. John's lawyer tried a different approach. He spoke of a man broken by grief, struggling to trust a daughter alone after his wife's death, making mistakes, but always trying his best. He suggested Clara was ungrateful, influenced by her wealthy boyfriend, looking to profit from exaggerated claims. The words made Clara's stomach turn, but Patricia had prepared her for this. Defense lawyers twisted truth. That was their job. The evidence would speak louder than rhetoric. The first witness was Doc Martinez. He testified about Clara's injuries the night Ethan brought her in, detailed the medical evidence of long-term abuse. He spoke clinically but with barely suppressed anger, describing fractures that had healed wrong, scars consistent with burns and cuts, the concussion and cracked ribs from that final beating. The jury listened, faces growing grimmer with each detail. The defense attorney tried to suggest Clara's injuries could have come from ranch work, from accidents, from anything but intentional violence. Doc Martinez shut that down with professional certainty. These injuries show a clear pattern of inflicted trauma over many years. The forensic evidence is unmistakable. Next came the financial expert, a forensic accountant who walked the jury through John Brennan's theft. He showed charts and spreadsheets, documented withdrawals and falsified expense reports. Over 8 years, John had stolen nearly $200,000 from his daughter's trust. The numbers were staggering, made worse by the knowledge of what that money could have meant. College, freedom, escape, all stolen while he made her feel worthless. Then it was time for Clara to testify. Patricia called her to the stand, and Clara walked forward on legs that felt steadier than she'd expected. She was sworn in, promised to tell the truth. As if she'd ever had the luxury of lying. She settled into the witness chair, found Ethan's face in the gallery, drew strength from his steady presence. Patricia led her through the testimony gently but thoroughly. Clara told her story, starting with her mother's death, the change in her, the first time he hit her. She described years of escalating violence, the isolation, the fear. Her voice shook sometimes but never broke. She spoke of the night in the storm, the beating that nearly killed her, the decision to run or die. "Why didn't you leave sooner?" Patricia asked, the question everyone always asked. Clara looked at the jury, made herself meet their eyes. "Because I had nowhere to go, and no way to get there. Because he controlled everything, the money, my identification, my freedom. Because every time I tried, I was brought back and punished worse. Because the whole town knew what was happening, and no one helped. Because when you're told every day that you're worthless, that no one will believe you, that you deserve the treatment you're getting, eventually you start to believe it yourself." The courtroom was silent. Several jurors were crying quietly. Clara continued, detailing the financial abuse, the lies about her age, the systematic theft of her inheritance. She spoke of discovering the truth, of finally understanding the depth of her father's betrayal. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to paint her as a liar, a gold digger, someone who'd fabricated abuse claims to access her trust fund. He questioned her relationship with Ethan, suggested she'd manufactured this entire situation for financial gain. Clara held her ground. She answered each question with calm clarity, refusing to be rattled. When he asked why she'd never reported the abuse to authorities, she looked directly at her father. "Because I'd learned that authorities don't help people like me. Because when I tried to leave at 15, the sheriff brought me right back to him. Because in Redemption, Texas, a man's right to discipline his daughter mattered more than that daughter's right to live without fear." Patricia's redirect was brief. "Clara, is there anything you'd like to say to the jury?" Clara took a breath, spoke from her heart. "My father stole my childhood, my sense of safety, my mother's legacy. He made me believe I was nothing. But I survived. I got out, and I'm here today, not for revenge, but for justice, for accountability. Because what he did was wrong, and it shouldn't be allowed to happen to anyone else's daughter. That's all I want, just recognition that what happened to me wasn't okay, and that he should answer for it." She stepped down from the stand on shaking legs. Ethan's face was wet with tears. He didn't bother to hide. The jury looked moved, angry, sympathetic. Mrs. Whitmore testified next, describing years of seeing Clara's injuries, of silent complicity she now regretted. "I should have done more. I should have called someone, reported it, taken her in myself. I'll carry that guilt the rest of my life. But I can do something now. I can tell the truth about what I saw." Even Sheriff Hayes was called, forced to admit on record that he'd ignored signs abuse, that he'd returned Clara to danger, that he'd failed in his duty to protect. His shame was visible, but it couldn't undo the years of harm. The prosecution rested. The defense called character witnesses who spoke of John Brennan's struggles, his grief, his attempts to be a good father, But their words rang hollow against the mountain of evidence. The testimony of doctors and accountants, and the victim herself. John Brennan didn't testify. His lawyer advised against it, knowing he'd be torn apart under cross-examination. So he sat silent at the defense table, radiating impotent rage. Closing arguments painted two different pictures. The defense asked for understanding and leniency for a broken man. Patricia asked for justice for a young woman who'd suffered enough. She reminded the jury of the evidence, the medical records, the financial documents, Clara's credible and consistent testimony. John Brennan stole his daughter's childhood, her mother's legacy, and nearly her life. The only question before you is whether he'll be held accountable. I trust you'll do what's right. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Clara waited in a conference room with her support system, unable to eat or think or do anything but wait. When the call came that the jury had reached a verdict, Clara's heart nearly stopped. This was it, the moment that would define whether justice existed or whether the system would fail her like everything else had. They filed back into the courtroom. The jury looked serious, somber. Clara couldn't read their expressions, couldn't tell if that was good or bad. She sat between Ethan and Patricia, hands clenched so tight her nails cut into her palms. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the formality of it all felt surreal, like theater, except the stakes were her life, her vindication, her future. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. We have, Your Honor, on the charge of aggravated assault. How do you find? Guilty. Clara's breath caught. Ethan's hand found hers, squeezed hard. On the charge of financial exploitation of a dependent, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of fraud, how do you find? Guilty. Each word fell like a hammer, solid and final. Guilty. 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 Clara felt something break loose in her chest. Years of held tension, releasing all at once. She was crying, couldn't stop, didn't want to. These were good tears, cleansing tears, the kind that washed away old poison. The judge thanked the jury, set a sentencing date for 2 weeks out. John Brennan sat motionless, staring at nothing. His lawyer looked resigned. The bailiff led him away in handcuffs, and Clara watched him go. This man who'd dominated her entire life, who'd seemed so powerful, so untouchable, he looked small now, defeated, human in a way that stripped away the monster and left only a pathetic, broken person who'd hurt someone weaker to feel strong. She felt Ethan's arms around her, Patricia's hand on her shoulder, the weight of her chosen family surrounding her with support and love. They'd done it. She'd done it, stood up, spoke truth, and been believed. The system had worked, justice had been served, and she was free, truly, completely free. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. News of the trial had spread, drawn attention. Cameras flashed, reporters called questions. Patricia shielded Clara from the worst of it, made a brief statement about justice being served and her client's courage. Clara didn't want to talk to reporters, didn't want this to become a spectacle. She just wanted to go home. Home. The word meant something different now. Not a place of fear and pain, but the ranch with its wide skies and good people. Home was Ethan's steady presence, Miguel's wisdom, Rachel's strength, Tommy's optimism. Home was safety and choice, and the freedom to be herself. They drove back to the ranch in Ethan's truck. Clara tucked against his side, exhausted, but peaceful. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her wrung out and empty in a good way, like poison finally purged from a wound. How do you feel? Ethan asked, as they pulled into the drive. Clara considered the question. Lighter. Like I've been carrying a weight for so long I forgot it was there, and now it's gone. She looked up at him. I feel free. The crew was waiting for them, had prepared a celebration. Nothing elaborate, just food and company and the acknowledgement of a battle won. They ate together on the kitchen table, the conversation flowing easy and warm. Clara found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, in a way she couldn't remember doing before. Later, after everyone had gone home, Clara and Ethan stood on the porch, watching the sun set. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, vast and beautiful. Clara leaned against the railing, breathing in the cold December air. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for finding me, for bringing me here, for standing with me through all of this. You don't need to thank me. You'd have found your way without me. You're stronger than you know." Ethan moved to stand beside her. "But I'm grateful I got to be part of your journey. Grateful you let me in." "What happens now?" Clara asked. "After sentencings, after this is all really over, what comes next?" Ethan pulled the pocket watch from his jacket, the one his father had given him. He opened it, showed her the inscription again. "Stand for what's right." He closed it, set it on the railing. "I think what comes next is we build something beautiful. Together, we take this ranch and make it matter. We help other people the way we've been helped. We live." Clara nodded, the rightness of it settling deep in her bones. 6 months later, spring had transformed the ranch into something alive, with possibility. The pastures burst with wildflowers, bluebonnets, and Indian paintbrush, painting the land in vibrant color. The horses grazed contentedly, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. The ranch house, fully restored now, stood proud with fresh paint and a new roof. But the biggest change wasn't visible in the buildings or the land. It was in the people who called this place home. Clara stood near the newly erected sign at the entrance to the property. Coal Ranch, established by Ethan and Clara. Not ownership, but partnership. Equal footing. She'd insisted on it, and Ethan had agreed immediately. Her inheritance had allowed them to expand operations, to hire more help, to start the rescue program they'd dreamed about. Horses that had been neglected or abused found sanctuary here, and Clara took particular satisfaction in helping them heal, seeing herself reflected in their journey from fear to trust. She'd reconnected with a few childhood friends who'd reached out after the trial, tentative messages of support that had grown into genuine friendships. The town of redemption had changed too, or maybe Clara just saw it differently now. A new sheriff had been appointed, one who took domestic violence seriously. Mrs. Whitmore visited regularly, bringing baked goods and grandmother-like affection. Some residents still gossiped, still judged, but Clara found she didn't care. Their opinions held no power over her anymore. Her father was serving 15 years in state prison. The sentencing had been surprisingly emotional. The judge had spoken directly to John Brennan about the severity of his crimes, about the trust he'd violated, the damage he'd done. Clara had attended sentencing but chose not to give a victim impact statement. She'd said everything she needed to say at trial. Now she just wanted to move forward, not remain tethered to the past through anger or bitterness. She felt pity for him sometimes, residual fear on difficult days, but mostly indifference. He was no longer the center of her world. He couldn't hurt her anymore. The ranch was flourishing beyond their initial hopes. Miguel had been promoted to ranch manager, his expertise invaluable. Tommy had proven himself reliable and was learning everything he could about horse training. Rachel had become Clara's closest friend, their shared understanding of survival creating a bond deeper than circumstance. Weekly dinners remained their ritual, this found family gathering around the table to share food and laughter, and the ordinary joys of a life well lived. Clara had started volunteering at a women's shelter 2 towns over, using her story to help others find the courage to leave dangerous situations. She spoke at support groups, shared resources, offered the kind of practical help she wished someone had offered her. The work was hard but deeply satisfying. Every woman she helped felt like honoring her mother's memory, like using her pain to create something meaningful. Ethan appeared from the barn, leading one of the rescued horses, a mare they'd named Hope. He spotted Clara by the sign and smiled, that warm expression that still made her heart skip. He'd proposed 3 months after the trial, in the same spot where they now stood. No grand gesture, just the two of them, and a simple question: will you build this life with me? She'd said yes without hesitation. The wedding was planned for next month, a small ceremony here on the ranch, with only the people who mattered. Clara wore her mother's locket every day now, polished and restored. Inside was the faded photograph, but she'd added a new picture beside it, her and Ethan on the porch, laughing at something Tommy had said, caught in a moment of pure joy. Past and present, loss and love, all held together in silver. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, joining her by the sign. Clara took his hand, laced their fingers together. "I was thinking about how I used to believe being saved meant someone taking you away from pain. But you showed me it means learning you can save yourself. That love isn't about rescue, it's about partnership." "We saved each other," Ethan said quietly. "That's how the best kind of love works." Clara looked out over the ranch, at the wide Texas sky, endless with possibility, at the life they'd built from broken pieces. She thought about the terrified woman who'd fled into a storm, certain she was running toward death. She'd been wrong. She'd been running toward life, toward herself, toward a future she'd never dared imagine. Some stories are about rescue. This one was about reclaiming a life stolen and building something beautiful from the ruins. Clara had found more than safety that stormy night. She'd found herself, and in finding herself, she'd discovered a love that didn't complete her, but celebrated the completeness she'd built within. She was whole. She was free. She was home.